28, all day today, of December 2022. Always takes me a moment or three to get this whole mess working. I'm Dana Durnford, and I'm also known as the Gamma Goat or the Nuclear Proctologist.org. You can call in, but keep it short. 709-589-4406 will get you live. We're going to compress February's of 2022 into 2 shows, which means in 3 hours I'm going to cover a 20-hour presentation that it took me in the first couple of weeks of February, which was 10 shows, 2 hours a show. Some of them are longer, but let's say 2 hours. And it's just to do a recap of 2022, because otherwise everything goes down the black hole. And 2022 had a lot of amazing stories, particularly when it comes to nuclear. And what you see, we're noticing in these couple of, this is number 3 of the series, because you're covering 2 weeks of a news cycle in 3 hours. Trust me, it's absurd amount of work that your time are trying to pull off here. And what you start to notice is these patterns with the nuclear industry is quite interesting. Hang around, let me tell you about it. Hope everybody's doing good. Dana Nasana is on the road. We got you, Dana. I'll keep an eye on the moderating. Maybe. Let's get her going. Be careful out there, my friend. So the big problem, the world, the entire planet, everybody on it, except for the nuclear industry, has an issue where you're being manipulated. So the worldwide media, universities included, universities, all of them included, are going to try to convince you that man-made anthropogenic radioactive fallout is benign and harmless and innocuous like a banana and sunshine and flying on an airplane. And the list goes on, climbing mountains and sleeping next to somebody, eating peanut butter and 15 minutes in a canoe and all kinds of kooky, batshit, lunatic lies. We're not going to do that to you. We're going to take you through the madness, and when you come out the other side, you're going to be smelling like a lemon instead of all the shit you just wallowed through. So, growing food alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation. Now, if you never heard that before, I'm going to repeat it because it's not supposed to be happening. The Japanese are so complacent, the regulatory agencies are so incompetent that in Japan, in a no-go zone where it's too radioactive to live, they have farms a couple of kilometers away from ongoing multiple fuel pool detonations and reactor core meltdowns that dwarfs Chernobyl. Not that Chernobyl was harmless or anything, it was brutal. And so was Fukushima, and it's much bigger. They're coming out and trying to convince you, and they did successfully, the majority of the planet, that these journalists in 2013 are in a building that doesn't even exist. The building to your left. There's a lot of effort going in to try to convince you, before we get into the news cycle, that only the bottom part of the building had fuel, but the fuel was at the very top of the building. So was the reactor cores. There is no top to the building. That's reactor 3, the mixed oxide fuel reactor 3, we might add. And see that stump over there? If you were looking for a house and you went into the neighborhood, would you go look at that? I'm not going to wait for your answer because I know what it is. The fuel pools are at the very top of the building, minus enough room for the cranes. Does that look like a 190-foot building? Well, there's where the building went. But the official story is that reactor 3 looks like this, and that, and there. It actually looks like this, and that, and there. Trying to convince you that they're in a building that don't even exist. That should stupefy you. And then the propaganda is relentless, vicious. You were poisoned, you were buried in radioactive fallout, but you can't perceive it, you can't smell it, you can't hear it, you can't feel it, you can't taste it, you can't pick it up. You can't throw rocks at it. But it's extremely dangerous in very small amounts for very long periods of time. So why are they all surrounded by farms? On top of that, the nuclear reactors worldwide. Why is the International Atomic Energy Agency perpetrating constant lies and deception and deceit and dishonesty? And it brings us to a poll. We got a poll for everybody tonight. Maybe. Should the International Atomic Energy Agency be disbanded, replaced with something reasonably functional for a change, and charged with crimes against humanity? Because that's exactly what it should be. They're allowing journalists to tell you nothing but deceit and dishonesty. They're pretending that the buildings that don't actually exist are full of journalists and that they got the fuel out of the pools in Reactor 3 and Reactor 4. And Reactor 4, fuel pool went about 1.5 miles straight up along with the reactor core. And as a planet, we can't sit here and tolerate this. This is a fatal mistake for all species. You can't escape it. And out with the old, thank goodness, and in with the scum. And away we go. Hope everybody's doing good this Wednesday. Ukraine now, so this is February the 1st, I would imagine. I don't see a date on that one. We're going to zip through headlines because you can't cover 20 hours of the news that we done in February. We're trying to give you a montage and a quick explanation. Here we go. Ukraine says Russia's radiation levels exceeded as Chernobyl's. Ukraine says Chernobyl's radiation levels exceeded. So this is Russia originally went into Chernobyl and dug up and drove their tanks through these exclusion zones, releasing huge amounts of radioactivity by stirring it up back into the environment. And there was a lot of this. There's 1,000 vehicles. So there was a lot of radiation released into the environment by just driving through. You ever drive down a dusty road, dirt road in the summertime and come out of it unscathed? So they carried the radiation through the rest of the country when they left on top of it, is what I'm saying to you. Ukraine reports higher Chernobyl radiation. They show you this old decrepit picture of Chernobyl. Remember, they closed 9,400 farms in United Kingdom, Ireland, and Scotland after Chernobyl. So it was a significant event, but in the scope of Fukushima, it's at best 1/100th of a Fukushima. Why did Russia's troops seize control of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster? Now remember, this is the headlines at the very beginning of the Russian-Ukraine conflict, because that was part of the news cycle. They were talking about radiation, right? But also remember that the countries didn't have embargoes against idiotic embargoes from the orders of UN. UN ordered everybody, because that's what everybody does now. No country is independent. You do whatever UN tells you. That's which Eisenhower called a military-industrial complex. So within a couple of weeks of this invasion, everybody banned the only commodity they had access to and caused massive inflation worldwide, and didn't even hurt the Russians because they just sold it to somebody else and continue to do so while everybody else suffers. So it's really interesting if you look at it in the perspective of it being staged war, then it makes kind of sense. Calling Chernobyl the world's worst nuclear disaster is unbelievably, criminally negligent. According to the brain cells, risk of Chernobyl catastrophe is real. So now because Russia had come through Belarus, which is a radioactive wasteland, went through into Ukraine, which is a radioactive wasteland, where almost the majority of the wheat for the impoverished countries worldwide is still grown. Try wrapping your mind around that statement. The risk of a Chernobyl catastrophe is real because you have fuel pools on site. And the fuel pools are active radioactive cores. They can melt down. Well, why would you do that? Does war ever make sense, Dana? No. I'm just saying. They did go in and contaminate all their equipment by going through the exclusion zone. They're still incredibly radioactive and will be for at least a few 100,000 years. The Russians seized Chernobyl should be terrified slate. So there was a lot of effort immediately with propaganda. The UN Atomic Energy Agency said radiation levels at Chernobyl. Now, this is UN. The most complacent thing you can do is accept anything United Nations tells you. Their legacy is just horrific. If you actually look at it, these are perpetual liars. We've never caught them telling the truth. Particularly unclear in the IAEA and ERPA and the IPCC and the rest of these subsidies of UN. Russia says Chernobyl is fine after the radiation spike during a fierce battle, which wasn't really a fierce battle. There are bigger atomic worries than Chernobyl in Ukraine and 15 other reactors. No, the big worry, they were at Chernobyl, was full of fuel pools and they were engaged in a war. After, you got to worry about the rest of the nuclear power plants. You got to worry about them cutting off external power. The Chernobyl plant was reported captured. What's in there? Again, like the media is just beyond gobblish with their deceit. Chernobyl radiation exceeds control levels in multiple areas. So there was allegedly a lot of radiation released. Then the United Nations came out and said, no, nothing's changed. Everything's just brutal doses. They haven't increased past brutal doses. Of course, the United Nations said it's equivalent to the background radiation anywhere else on the planet at a nuclear meltdown. So get rid of United Nations, for goodness sakes. Do the species that's going to survive this onslaught and humanity that might pull out of it a favor, because you can't have a future NIAEA. Military nuclear experts explain the actual danger of troops battling. Military nuclear experts, they're like, to expect these types of people to tell you the truth is absurd. For 80 years, we've never got a single one where I can take a clip and show you them telling the truth. Hence the reason we are forced to exist. There is no glory in what I'm doing. I've been assaulted, I've been shot at, I've been attacked, I've been demonized and vilified. That ain't gonna change. That ain't gonna drive me away. Chernobyl radiation exceeds control levels in multiple areas after being seized by moron Russia. Chernobyl disaster caused summary effects on humans, effects on the environment. Again, they talk about bananas and potato chips and walking in the sunshine and getting on airplanes and sleeping next to somebody. Propaganda. All of them claim Chernobyl is the world's worst nuclear disaster, I might add, which is an astonishing statement considering what Fukushima has done. multiple reactors, each of them many, many times larger than Chernobyl, pure uranium, pure plutonium. Chernobyl was a new reactor with graphite. Each of Fukushima had decades of reactor cores at the top of the building. Chernobyl was a new reactor, never had none of those attributes. Infinitely worse in every facet. The worst nuclear disaster in history, Chernobyl. So if they're going to start off the headline with a lie, what do you think the rest of the story is going to be like? You can pretend that they are not lying to you, but that's all you're doing. You can't base plans on a lie. You can't base your futures on lies. You can't have a future when it's based on lies. And you can't have a future if you don't stand up for yourselves. Hydrogen is so leaky it can penetrate and weaken steel, yet it's technical problems are missing from the hydrogen economy debate. The hydrogen can leak right through the tanks, right? But they've come up with quite a lot of good solutions. You just don't store it for too long. Hits to Ukraine's atomic plant poses a risk to the energy grid. Not only that, if you attack the energy grid, you can melt the reactors because they are dependent on external power plants. So we keep an eye on the Polish, the International Atomic Energy Agency, aka United Nations, aka people who've done nothing but lie to you for 80 years, be disbanded, replaced with humans and charged with crimes against humanity and species. I'll help you win the case. I'll provide you all the documentation you will ever need to win the case. Everything. If you want to drag them through the system, you can count on me. I'll go to any country you want and help prosecute them. All of them. And we need to prosecute them. Past, present, and future. They need to be prosecuted, held accountable, have their degrees removed, jailed, if not executed legally, for crimes against humanity and for omnicide. It's still hot, but summer is over in Europe. Yeah, it's called Fukushima effect. You ever heard tell of the Fukushima effect? Let me explain it to you. Let me take some moment. It's quite fascinating, really. I'll show you the French model of Japan's radioactive fallout. And what you're seeing is an invisible plume. Think of it as a snowstorm that you can't see it though, or taste it, or hear it, or feel it, or touch it, or pick it up, or throw rocks at it. So it's an invisible plume that covers this one, but it covers the whole planet in 16 days. Now, gas, oil, and coal doesn't do that, by the way. It only travels 50 or 100 miles. Radiation covers the whole planet in just 16 days. The radiation, think of it as an invisible snowstorm where the snow never melts and it covers the whole planet in 16 days, and all it does is snow constantly. It never melts. You'd bloody well get it then, wouldn't you? You have to think of it the exact same way because it's actually infinitely worse. It pulses every atom, and you put 2 million atoms on the head of a needle, but they can pulse and hit you from 50 feet away and wreck your DNA and your chromosomes every second. With this energy, it pulses in every direction, like a light bulb. When you turn a light bulb on and off, it doesn't just light up one section of your room, it lights up the whole room. Well, radiation pulses, it sends out energy in every direction, almost at the speed of light, almost at 186,000 miles per second. That's global warming. It's been going on for 80 years. Fukushima was a pulse, a massive pulse of around at least 8 fuel pools and a common spent fuel pool and 4 reactor cores that were pure uranium plutonium, and 1 was mixed oxide fuel. And this is why France has models. Many countries, certainly we cover many, have same models. France's model says it does it in 16 days, but coal, oil, and gas has none of those attributes. The carbon makes plants grow, and insects thrive, and bacteria making forests healthy and soaking up water instead of burning in forest fires because the foliage isn't breaking down. The litter isn't decomposing because you killed the bacteria and the fungus from the radioactive fallout and destroyed the ecosystem from the inside out. It's been going on for 80 years, but Fukushima was the straw that broke the planets and the species back. It's time to fight back. It's time to have a conversation. At least have a conversation. Stop lying. Start admitting the facts for a change. Put that into the equation, then you come up with solutions. There ain't no solutions without the facts. And they're not going to feed you the facts. They've been doing it for 80 years of lies. Can't tell you the truth right now. I'm here to tell you the truth. You don't want to hear the truth? There's something wrong with you. Let's get it on. The world has become highly vulnerable to nuclear disasters. Yeah, because it covers the planet in radioactive fallout. This Norwegian Institute here research model, this model right here in the bottom right-hand corner is 19 days, 468 hours of radioactive fallout. Are you seeing a pattern, or is it just me? Maybe I got it all wrong. Maybe it turns us all into Spider-Man and the Hulk. It just takes a couple of thousand years to manifest. Incompetent narcissists, that's how you actually should describe a nuclear academics and pro-nuclear community. 80 years of living the lie, and it's coming back to haunt us all. France fury at Macron as the leaders prepare for a woeful autumn. All their reactors were breaking down at the one time. Because the government built them all at the one time. That's probably the worst combination imaginable. Flick fact. Is Clinton's nuclear power plant the most expensive in the world? I'm not even going to go there. They're all expensive. Chernobyl was expensive. Hanford, they want another $640 billion. Let's get on track. We got a stupid amount of great stories to cover. China burns more coal as the drought cripples hydropower system. Well, why not use geothermal, geniuses? They haven't been hiding that away for you, have they? They don't mention that to you, do they? It's everywhere. You drill down and tap in. 1,000 degrees right there below your feet everywhere you go. Why are you burning coal? Why are you burning oil? Why are you burning gas? Why are you using disgusting nuclear? Inside the making of a New York City's bizarre nuclear war, this was an adverb that they put on TV. Get inside, stay tuned to the propaganda machine. And everybody come out and said, what's up with the fear-mongering? Well, Russia invaded Ukraine. They thought they were supposed to start with the fear-mongering right away. They got out there a little too much enthusiasm. And people called it for them. But hey, 2 months later, nobody called them. They were like, hey, let's go find a video of what we do. Propaganda in overdrive. Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant attacked in pictures. What's the date on this? Come on, give us a date. That was the 8th. It must have been when I went back. Oh, yeah. Hang on. This is supposed to be the 2nd month. Bear with me. We'll get it right. What's wrong with these people? They don't put a date on their stories. They go backwards another one. Total coincidence there's no dates on these, isn't it? One more try. No, that can't be true. One more try. Got to be a date on one of these stories. August the 22nd, the world has become highly vulnerable to nuclear disasters. I got no idea why it says August, but it did. Oh, did I go to the wrong folder for that stuff? Hang on. Bear with me. Because we were just covering February, right? I must have thrown a folder in with April or February folders. That means I can click ahead. Bear with me. We're almost there. Yeah, let me go a little bit further. Because you have all these folders for each month, and sometimes one might accidentally end up in there. If not, we'll just go grab the appropriate folder and get it on. There we go. February the 6th. This is hard to appreciate, right? But every time you do 5 shows a week, they're in a folder and they're dated. But, you know, when it comes to December, here I got January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December folders. And each of them got 20 folders of shows into it. And I accidentally threw one of the August folders that after the show I got to remember to grab and stick in the August folder when we get to August. That week or that show, this was just a one-day show that we had accidentally thrown in there. It's all good. Let's keep going. Taiwan reaffirms food safety as top priority for imported Japanese food. We had only done a little bit of that folder, so it's not a big deal. Taiwan reaffirms food safety a top priority for... Now, of course, Taiwan had a referendum in 2018 to ban the food from Fukushima Prefecture and surrounding prefectures. 55 countries banned it from 14 prefectures. Not Canada, but 55 real countries. Canada removed all restrictions after 93 days. No checks. So Japan couldn't ship the radioactive food anywhere, only Canada, and they did. Canada was taken over by the nuclear industry in the 70s, and now they have destroyed the health of everybody in the country by plastering every supermarket, every corner store with food from the nuclear wasteland. Operating some bioaccumulation is a disaster for Canada. Operating coal-fired power plants more expensive than switching to renewables. Again, right? This is February 6, 2022. UK could pioneer the use of heat from the seabed. Yeah, they can do geothermal too. Like say, geothermal, you can go down alongside any gas, oil, or coal plant, go straight down, tap into geothermal, build your geothermal replacement, and when it's finished, turn that on and turn off the gas, oil, coal, or dirty, disgusting, despicable nuclear. But you know, the minute that you do that, then everybody worldwide is going to want to do it too, and that's the end of the industry, the death machines. China has become top importer of Japanese food for the first time. China, which, by the way, China still hasn't lifted all the bans. This is Japanese food, not Fukushima, see? Sleight of hand. China, even today, currently still bans appropriately Fukushima. This is a new power plant they're going to build over in the UK. Read it and weep. Surrounded by farms, as far as you can see. Why do they build all the nuclear power plants in prime farmlands? So they can poison you in your supermarkets, because that's the outcome. Currents of radioactive fallout from Norway as a result of wind scale. So it doesn't have to be surrounded by farms to poison you, by the way, but they are. A study of the movement of radioactive materials discharges the wind scale fire. It covers Europe. Wind scale, they changed the name after the Sellafield. And because of the crimes they committed, and they've done that in the 80s. Atmospheric emissions from wind scale accident of October 1957. Americium intertidal sediments, which what they're talking about breaks down into plutonium about 80 days later. So why not talk about plutonium? Well, we couldn't get funding to do the study on plutonium, on the americium. And they're not going to acknowledge that publicly to you because they won't get any more funding. Wind scale radio Cesium, which is how the British call cesium. And they're the only ones on the planet that does that. So whenever you see a study where they refer to as radio Cesium with an A, you know that's the British. And the British are the worst. The academics in Britain are literally scumbags, douchebags. Wind scale radio cesium in the Clyde Sea area. But there's a lot of little studies. When you start looking at it, wind scale and leukemia controversy, there is no controversy. They try to blame the children's leukemia clusters in Crumbia, right alongside of Sellafield, which is formerly known as wind scale, on the common flu or interracial breeding, despite the fact that it was a ludicrous assertion. They produce studies they give to the politicians so they can sleep at night. See, honey, we're not monsters. Cancer in Crumbia, what is 1,800 illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses from radiation. It's not just cancer. You compromise your immune system, for goodness sakes, and birds and animals and insects and everything else. So you're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless and innocuous and benign. Don't worry, I'm going to tell you 500 more times before 2022 is over. Ionizing radiation to human gender proportion at birth. More males than females for radioactive areas around nuclear power plants. Not counting now accidents. Statistically, Chernobyl changed the male-female population of births forever after in favor of males through the entire Europe. The nuclear studies were suggesting that the nuclear war, you call bomb testing, the same bombs, the same radioactive fallout, and it was a vicious war because if you think of the Soviet Union bombs, one of them was equal to 3,800 Nagasaki bombs going off at the same time. 3,800. Is that a nuclear war, I wonder? No, Dana, that was nuclear testing. Hey, moron. They knew they were going to contaminate the entire planet. That's not testing. That's how they covered it up. They called it testing. And you fell for it. And it's shocking because they lied to you so much you're incapable, the average person. Not my usual listeners, but the average person was completely incapable of understanding that there is this difference. Ionizing radiation, human gender proportion at birth. We've seen so many of these studies around just test reactors. Very low megawatts. Imagine around the big disease factories, aka nuclear power plants, how brutal it is. More males than females. You know what that means? Less humans, less birds, less insects, less animals, less whales, less unicorns. Environmental impact of particles emitted from the wind scale piles. And so they call it a pile instead of a nuclear meltdown. Do you think that's an accident? I've never heard wind scale described as a meltdown. They call it the fire in the piles. There's a lot of academics that should get the piles for the rest of their life, by the way. Radiation events after discovery of fission. Now, you're not getting access to that. Don't need it. I got an absurd archive. Radiation events after the discovery of fission. United Kingdom, for instance, just one of many countries, spent 3 decades non-stop taking their high-level waste on ships out to sea and dumping it. Not stopping in one spot and dumping it, by the way, but just driving around throwing it overboard. If you want to talk about evil, nuclear is definitely your best spot. There's nothing on the planet compares to it. All the criminals and all the jails on the entire planet can't hold a candle to the nuclear industry for evil. And it's evil on a whole different level. Disposal of radioactive waste from wind scale. That's a good one, by the way. The whole story will, with me, I can't even sleep at nights when I read this stuff. I'll pass out from exhaustion eventually. But it's horrifying what they actually done way back in the day. Over the hills from Windscale. Go read some of that. You want to scare the shit out of yourself. There's quite a few of them, by the way, those papers. Mortality in Crumbia during 59 to 78 with reference to cancers in young people around Windscale. But you can't just include cancer. There's heart problems, lethal heart problems, lethal lung problems, lethal respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. If you survive it, there's Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. Yeah, it's a real nice people. The cancer epidemic started in the 70s during peak nuclear testing. Total coincidence. Just like all the nuclear plants being surrounded by farms. Total coincidence. Total coincidence that everything with replicating cells has no autoimmune defense or trigger to defend themselves against anthropogenic man-made radiation. Total coincidence. Secular trends in newborn sex ratio. Again, these are studies showing this incredible disparity of males and females from radioactive fallout. This is particularly important when it comes to species and everything else in between. There's the coast. You want to go down there and get your seafood? Knock your socks off. There's the scums responsible. Enrico Fermi's right there. There's the people that don't know any better and bought into it. That cracks me up, when I see stuff like that, people that complacent. Americium intertidal sediment. Plutonium from Europe reprocessing operations. So you got Donneray, which is a reprocessing facility in Scotland, UK, owned by UK, and Sellafield, and you had two in France. La Hague was the biggest one with 500 security guards. The principal source has been Sellafield Windscale site in UK, discharging to the Irish Sea 590 terabecquerels of just plutonium-239 and 240 since 1952. These are stunning numbers you're talking about of just plutonium, which is lethal on a millionth of a gram. Um, 15,945 trillion. It's 4.6 trillion isotopes per Curie. I can't even remember now. Let's keep it rolling. We'll never get through it. Cesium-137, you have 88 Curies per gram. Strontium-90 is 140 per gram. So, in other words, for isotopes, there's different quantities, right? In fact, the cesium are about 10 million times more radioactive than the potassium-40 that they've been using to manipulate you with. It's actually 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Maybe that'll make you understand it a bit better. Maybe it won't. Let's fight about it. Come on, bring it on. Observations of Fukushima fallout in Great Britain. Radioactive plutonium, 210 polonium, not plutonium, polonium, in Clyde Sea. which comes from nuclear, but it's the idea of using it is so they don't use the word plutonium, see? That's the more important isotope, right? And the list goes on. Uptake of vegetables by Chernobyl, age radio cesium upland West Crumbia, which is right alongside of a nuclear meltdown from 1957, is hemorrhaging 8 million liters a day into the Atlantic Ocean. They're trying to blame radiation around the nuclear disaster on radioactive fallout from Chernobyl. Excuse me. There's nothing really much more batshit lunatic than the nuclear industry. 80 years of telling you the same lies. Chernobyl was covered up for decades. The true horror will never come out. They've actually abandoned the fuel pools there for about 5 decades. There's nobody they claim knows what's in it. But of course, there's got to be people out there that knows what's in it, that are still alive. Maybe. They kidnapped people from the theaters, from the back rows in 1957. They didn't go to nuclear power plants and look for volunteers or when they had a meltdown. They didn't go to the military to get volunteers or the police or the fire department. No. The police took buses, and the police being the police at the administrative police, not legislative, at Windscale, took the bus, went to the theaters and kidnapped people from the back rows of the theaters. In those days, the poor people sat in the back rows, brought them in to push the fuel rods out of the reactor core that was melting down. Nuclear scientists wouldn't go near it, see? And they're better than you, so. It's better to sacrifice everybody than a single nuclear scientist, Data. I hear you, man. I hear you. Soon the whole world will hear you, you sack of shit. Vertical profile artificial radionuclide concentrations in the central Arctic Ocean because of wind scale in La Hague in France contaminated the entire Arctic. But hey, no, then it's like a banana and potato chip walking in sunshine. I ever catch you, you'll never walk in sunshine again, I guarantee you. The broken legs I'll leave you with. Distribution of Cesium 137 in the British coastal waters. Whenever you hear the word cesium, which is real, it's a danger, it's a very nasty isotope. It's designed, though, not to tell you about uranium, plutonium, and americium. The curium, which is the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods. Not iodine, not cesium. Yeah, and Russia is still a member state of the International Atomic Energy Agency. He's right, James. Thank you. And they can't get rid of them either. How's everybody doing? Plutonium is not weak. Radium's not stronger than plutonium. Hang on. I disrespect you for putting that there, you troll. I hate the nuclear trolls more than anything else. Hang on, I'll show you folks. Here we go. It takes me a second. I'll bring up some plutonium studies so you can wrap your mind around a statement I'm going to make for you. Oh, yeah, bring it. Here we go. This is really straightforward. So, curium isotopes are the major byproduct in a radiated nuclear fuel rod. And you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for curium isotopes than you do for plutonium isotopes. So plutonium on 144 beagle dogs and puppies, Tumors of the lungs, the skeleton, and the liver occurred beginning at about 3 years after exposure. Bone tumors found in 93 dogs were the most common cause of death. Lung tumors found in 46 dogs were the second most common cause of death. Liver tumors were found in 20 dogs, but were the cause of death in only 2 dogs, occurred later than the tumors in the bones and the lungs. So the plutonium isotopes caused lethal tumors in the lungs, the livers, and the bones simultaneously. And we just had a troll in there trying to tell you that plutonium was nowhere, it was harmless, radium was more dangerous. So they got their ass blocked. You scumbags that done that, you degenerate scum, you cowards that put that in my comment section. Don't ever come back to my site, you disgusting maggots. How dare you come into my comment section and lie like that? Oh well, another day, another nuclear troll. You know what they say, for every good person, there's 1 million nuclear trolls out there. Sellafield safety shocker, nuclear waste abandoned for 40 years ago lies in rotting containers open to the wind and the sun and everything else. They're all going to be split in atoms, hemorrhaging into your environment. A complete genocide machine left to do his job. The radioactive fallout from a nuclear accident that rocked Britain 50 years ago was underestimated. 50 years later, they're like, oh, maybe it was underestimated. Let's keep it rolling here. The industry is perpetual liars. Plutonium from Sellafield in all the children's teeth. Plutonium was named after the devil, not radium. Estimates of the uptake of Cesium 137 by cattle grazing contaminated pastures around Crumbia, which is where Sellafield, aka Windscale, is actually too. They closed 9,400 farms in United Kingdom, Ireland, and Scotland after Chernobyl. You should have evacuated United Kingdom, Ireland, and Scotland, and you still should. You're not getting rid of this stuff. It doesn't go away. It's your forever disease factory. Plutonium and magnesium activities in the North Sea, the German coastal regions. People were getting cancers from Sellafield in all kinds of communities along the coastlines, hundreds of miles away in different countries. Because this stuff doesn't just... But the coastlines are going to be just absurd in the local area. They got 8 million liters a day hemorrhaging into the Atlantic Ocean since 1957 with a mixed oxide fuel meltdown that they're just pouring water over. If that's not evil, what the fuck is? I apologize. I didn't mean to swear. It's a little hard not to sometimes, but I'm usually really good. Nuclear safety and regulation. What kind of silly, demented, twisted joke is that? Radioactive releases from nuclear installations. It's constant. The fuel pools are still splitting the atoms they were from millions of homes, and there's 1,000 fuel pools worldwide with multiple reactor cores. Each one is hemorrhaging the same amount of isotopes with the power of 1 million homes. It's just not under pressure anymore. It's not at 650 degrees anymore. It's not excited anymore. But it's still splitting the atoms. That's why they got to exchange 120,000 liters. Try juggling 120,000 1-liter jugs. You'll realize what we're actually talking about. And there's 1,000 pools worldwide doing the same thing. Each liter is trillions of anthropogenic man-made isotopes. At what point are you going to try to fight back? At what point? I know I made my decision a long time ago. Radioactive releases from nuclear installations, evaluation of accidental atmosphere. Accidental! The Canadian nuclear reactors, just one of them, releases 16 million trillion becquerels a year. Legally. Because you just keep raising the limit to accommodate whatever it is. No, it's not an accident, that's legal. 36 million trillion isotopes of tritium is legal in Canada. 44,000 becquerels per liter is legal in Canada. 15 is legal in Europe, in California. No, the nuclear industry just, there's no checks and balances. They're so out of control. And this is why we got a poll tonight acknowledging that. Should the retarded IAEA, the Despicable International Atomic Energy Agency, aka United Nations, be disbanded and replaced and charged with crimes against humanity and the species? Of course they should. There should be trials in The Hague for them. Ionizing radiation, human gender proportions at birth. Well, like, how much evidence do you actually need to understand that this is not a game? Because you need to get it together. You need to start fighting back. You need to make a stand. You can't sit in silence anymore. Lesions in the stomach. Like lesions, 50 becquerels a kilogram for adults will give you permanent lesions in your organs. You really think it won't do the same thing for animals and mammals? Vegetation retention and vegetation milk ratio follow iodine 131. There's going to be, because iodine 131 is a short half-life, there's going to be 10 times more 132, 30 times more 133, 31 times more iodine 129, that same sample. 132 and 133 are actually 9 times more effective at ionizing radiating the thyroid glands than the brutal 131 actually is, which is unbelievably effective. Which means now you're producing radioactive hormones on top of everything else. And it ain't going to get better once you cross that line. Vegetation retention and fallout of 131. Using 131 because it's a short half-life. Like I showed you earlier, cesium or curium isotopes, a big byproduct of radiated fuel rods, not iodine. And curium isotopes they killed all the beagle dogs and puppies too. Trends in birth and birth sex ratio in the vicinity of the German reactors. So they're suggesting that just around these low wattage, megawatt reactors, experimental reactors they have at universities and right in the middle of your cities, that the surrounding community was a significant discrepancy between males and females, more males than females, and suggesting, because the only way you can pull that off, the only reason you're looking at that is because everybody got radiated. You can't avoid radiating everybody. That's why those types of studies actually exist. That's the acknowledgement. Because you're not going to do a study on gender because of radiation unless everybody got poisoned. Because that's how you proved it, see? The evidence is something else, isn't it? Assessment of prospective food chain doses from radioactive discharges from the British National Fuel Limited in Sellafield. There's a criminal bunch of idiot machines, by the way. How do you not contaminate the food chain? First off, they're surrounded by farms, like I showed you earlier. That's on purpose because everything is hemorrhaging into the environment. Almost all reactors, fuel pools, dumps, and everything else are surrounded. But for some reason that day I was covering, this was just a one day, all these little studies. And I'm scared to think of how many of these I actually covered on that day. So we're just going to move on to the headlines of the next story, because I can put 600 of them together and cover it in one day to tell the story that never been told before. Just by bringing everything together, it gives you a real perspective. Nobody's ever done that before, right? It's very powerful. And Canada history, police said over 2.5 million people in the streets of Ottawa. Taiwan to end the ban on food from the nuclear disaster. Nuclear disasters don't disappear in 11 years, 12 years. That's the 7th of January, that story there, 7th of January. So we're still on track. Kind of got sidetracked on a couple of stories earlier, but we caught it and moved on. Taiwan removed the food ban with a handshake, not with science. This is Taiwan government preparing to lift the Fukushima. Fukushima is right in the middle of a massive radioactive nuclear wasteland on top of it. It's important, believe it or not. It's important. You don't want to eat it. Just a single, and particularly food from the nuclear wasteland could have huge numbers. And every atom that gets in your body's going to attack it for the rest of your life with white blood cells. Which means for the rest of your life, there's a cause and effect. The body attacks for the rest of your life with white blood cells and over decades builds a tumor around it. But if you're eating it and breathing it and drinking it and everything else, then you're getting millions in your body. Some is passing through, but the majority of the nasty ones are going to sequester your muscles, your organs, and your bones permanently. Your body's going to attack each and every one permanently like it's a razor blade cut. It's going to attack it constantly with white blood cells from every direction. And eventually, if you keep consuming it, you get more and more. That's called leukemia, because you have more white blood cells than red blood cells because you're using them all up on the bioaccumulation. So lifting a food ban on food from a nuclear wasteland is a slow kill. It takes 10, 15 years for statistically, because you're talking about, first off, you're going to see a huge increases in infant mortality. You're going to see congenital malformations. You're going to see open heart surgery on neonates and infants skyrocket. Like Japan is 14,200 per 100,000 need open heart surgery to babies. These are extraordinary numbers. These are catastrophic. And it's time to gut up. Time to grow up, and it's time to put a stop to it. And the first step of putting a stop to it is getting rid of the despicable, disgusting, sadistic, twisted International Atomic Energy Agency, aka United Nations. At the same time, you got to get rid of UNSCLEAR and IRPA and the rest of these nuclear subsidies, because they're all the same people. They got to be replaced with humans, people that actually aren't bought and paid for, and generational apologists. And they need to be charged with crimes against humanity and the species. And they need to be held accountable for it. You can't have a future without holding the criminal accountable on this level. Taiwan to lift the food import bans. So February the 6th was a sad day for Taiwan. All the media came out and stuck it and destroyed the country by deceiving the population. Refused to have a conversation. Urgent Taiwan to lift import bans. That wasn't urgent. That was mockery. By the way, it's really unusual for the country that's lifting the restrictions for their medias to tell the story. It's exceptional. Japan is really good at bragging about it, though. And Food Navigator, they're disgusting what they've been doing. They're not Food Navigator, they're the nuclear industry. They call themselves, that's just one of the public relation firms disguised as a food media, and they promote the radioactive wasteland food every chance they get. We've covered them probably 100 times doing it. And Google puts them up on their front pages of the news section. Negligible radiation exposure from Fukushima food imports. Again, right? Your media is your worst enemy. Your universities, your schools of mass destruction, you should call them, are your worst enemies. They wrecked you. They had no mercy on you whatsoever. Atomic Energy Council to expand national food inspection capacity. Yes, Taiwan. Well, first off, Taiwan had 2,000 university students, nuclear students, after Fukushima spammed the internet for months and months and months with propaganda that Fukushima was harmless and that it was like a banana and a potato chip. And that came out in 2016 or so. The nuclear students were tasked with going online, Facebook and everywhere else, and Twitter and YouTube, and posting propaganda on all stories related to Fukushima. Taiwan lifts the import bans on the Japanese goods. You can't call it goods. That's propaganda. It's not good, it's food. The goods weren't banned, the food was. Right, by using the word good and food in the same sentence, right, it's psychological. I'm surprised he didn't have the Hulk out there promoting it. Me the Hulk, Hulk says good. Mainland China was top importer of Japan food in 2021, surpassing Hong Kong and the U.S. Well, the U.S. still had a ban for 14 prefectures. China did too, but they were taken from the other prefectures. China got a big population. That doesn't mean they were taken from Fukushima, though. There are $1 million tuna each year at the beginning of the season for tuna. A tuna will go in the auction block, sell for $1 million. The whole world media will come out and say, wow, tuna got $1 million. The next one didn't, and they're come close to it. IAEA team to visit Fukushima next week. I think that was their first trip in 11 years to review the water release. There is no water release. It hasn't stopped. The idea, right, of the water release, fable, because it's a 100% fable, so you don't think of what's already happened. This was Germans' model over 6 years. And this is the NOAA American model based on 40 days, but only based on venting. They don't want you to think about what happened. They want you to pretend none of this happened, is what I meant to say. And nothing will happen when everything has already happened. If you really like horror stories, nuclear should be your number one go-to. Hollywood can't touch it. Look, IAEA team don't visit nuclear meltdowns. It simply doesn't work that way. These are perpetual cowards. The tanks were built to manipulate you. There was 1,000 tanks in 2013. There's 1,000 tanks in 2022. How many tanks did they build in the last 9 years? Let me see. 1,000 from 1,000 meant they built... let me see. I'm a nuclear scientist. I can't do that. Man, I'll call my mom. Oh, that's right. It's 0. Experts scumbags. Experts degenerates. That's why we got a poll tonight, by the way. Should the expert degenerates at the International Atomic Energy Agency, aka United Nations, be disbanded and replaced and charged with crimes against humanity and the species? Huh? Should they? IAEA, China.org, which is probably an American site. Just because it says China.org don't mean jack shit. I'm the nuclearproctologist.org, for goodness sakes. I ain't going to stick my finger up anybody's butts. Except for nuclear industry, of course. And that's what we do every day. Armenia Prime Minister receives Japanese ambassador extraordinarily and throw him off a fucking roof and get it over with. These are scumbags. Toshiba to sell stake in Courier and split into 2 entities. Yeah, because Toshiba helped perpetrate the lies and the deceit about Fukushima. They didn't go and try to fix it. No, TEPCO. The reason got TEPCO still alive, because it was bankrupt immediately, is so you don't blame the nuclear industry, you blame TEPCO. Oh, TEPCO done it. No. Nuclear industry never went there. Only the homeless have been there, and the destitute, and the victims of society, immigrants who don't speak the language. Fukushima operator sends robot in the worst hit melted reactor. Like, if you believe anything the nuclear industry tells you, you're in for real shocks. It'll all come back and haunt you. It took 11 years to cut the top off that stack. The bottom of it is 25 sieverts. It's a lethal dose from quite a far away for a human. And they're going to claim robots are inside the actual reactors. That's outside the reactor building, quite a distance away from the reactors. And that particular stacks are used to vent the fuel pools into the environment, by the way. That should scare the shit right out of anybody if they understand the significance. LDP resolution condemns 5 ex-prime ministers. This was a great story. This was a great story, by the way. I got to put that over there in my pile. This was 5 prime ministers saying don't eat the food from Japan. After Kishida got elected, I think. Let me see. I don't normally want to go down the stories because we're trying to run through as many as we can in a reasonable period of time before my brain goes, because you got to get up the next day and do it all again, right? And you're trying to cover 10 shows, which is basically 20 hours, in 3 hours. And so you can't cover the stories. You can only, commentate on just the headlines to give a blurb of a story. For disseminating false information regarding the accident, Tokyo Power Holding Incorporation's Fukushima #1 nuclear power plant, using the word TEPCO is meant to lead you away from the real issues. Policy Research Council Board. People that are better than you. The resolution criticizes the former Prime Minister for sending a letter to the European Union, who was going to have a vote on the taxonomy, stating that many children are suffering from thyroid cancers due to the 2011 accident. It accused him of fostering groundless, discriminating nation and prejudice. Yeah, really. The 5 former prime ministers got together to tell a lie, did they? And United Kingdom's Geraldine Thomas, Imperial College of London, was doing most of the peer reviews for the thyroid studies. I mean, one study, 16,646 out of 40,000 children with thyroid tumors started. Girls are 4 times more likely, and 2 to 3 times bigger tumors. And pre-Fukushima was 1 to 2 per million. But anyway, that's a super important story. 5 former prime ministers. I just want to grab those 2 and put them over in my folder so I can find it later. Okay, let's keep her rolling. Rockfish caught off Fukushima in February of this year still exceeds radioactivity limits. Let me see if I can find the numbers for you. Certain stories you got to kind of... Oh, and you flip that into the tunnels. 500 becquerels a kilogram of just cesium. So they're not, by the way, they're not looking for alphas, betas, neutrons, and x-rays. They're only looking at gamma, and they're only looking at 1 gamma. And obviously they're not looking then. South Korea's nuclear future is a new election battleground. You can't just have cesium. If you got cesium, it's going to be loaded with plutonium, loaded with curium, loaded with Californian, loaded with everything. And all of these are very, very harmful in very, very small amounts. for a very, 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 very long time. Hi, everybody. Hugs for everybody. Hope everybody's having a good day. Yeah, we're doing a... First off, I'm pretty burnt out. I've been at this for so many years. And it's so-called holidays. I'm trying to do these broadcasts convenience for me. Because I do my shows typically 10 p.m. my time. And what that means is when the show's over, it's bedtime. And I'm exhausted. I've been at it the entire day. What I'm doing is a recap, and it could take 20 shows to do a recap. And they're very difficult, believe it or not, to do all the setups and everything else, put everything together, and then to sit there for several hours and tell the story. And I'm so exhausted because I've been at this for so long. I wanted to try doing shows. I start at 4 p.m. my time, 4 p.m. in the afternoon my time. And then when the show is over, I got 3, 4, 5, 6 hours where I can take a break before I go to bed. And I'm sleeping much better the last couple of days, I noticed. And it's still an enormous workload, right? But don't mistake what I'm saying there. I'm not complaining about the workload. I'm just stating a fact. Because it is, right? It's a brutal amount of work. And we don't mind it. It's all good. But you have to pace yourself. It's like going in a boxing ring or whatever. Say going in a boxing ring with another boxer and swinging every punch trying to kill the other guy. You're going to be exhausted. And say you got 12-round fight. Time you get to 3 rounds, you're going to be too exhausted, and you're going to that's the end of you, right? And so I'm trying to pace myself with the workload, and we got to do the work. The story has to be told. And so what I'm trying to do is just do a recap. And so it takes 2 shows to do a month. Because each month we do 20 shows. And each show is 2 hours long. And so how do you condense that down into 2 3-hour shows, for instance, right? It's hard. And so we're doing the best we can. Japan's traditional sake makers preserve century-old distilling method. Well, that's really nice. Wow, I'm impressed. That's fantastic. Sure, great. Look, you're amazing. But the problem is you're in Fukushima, and I'll explain why that's a problem. Now, my shows are like I'll bring in supporting documentation for all of my assertions. So doing these types of shows, kind of like a radio show where I haven't got to bring too much and just blurp, blurp, blurp on each story, right? It's all good. Sometimes I'll bring in supporting documentation. In this case, and the case on Britain's wind scale, I brought you a lot of supporting documentation, but I couldn't cover it all, so I just moved on to the next day, right? But we gave you enough to give you the logistics of the significance of the original stories. And you can go back through my archive and find those pretty easily if you wanted to. Absorb doses in red bone marrow, because the stories I'm using... if you search at my site, if you type in the story, you'll find that day, that video from that day, right? Because I do list my stories underneath my videos typically. You can't do it with this type of presentation. But my 5-day-a-week shows, I do list 95% of the stories under my video if there's room. Absorb, now, I'll bring you all the way back to this study, because this is important. This is the scumbags at Unclear. In 2013, United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation. They'll cut your throat. If you scratch their car, they cut your throat and walk away. They won't give a shit about you. So the first line over there is the communities in Japan that are not evacuated. The second line over there is the population. The third line, average disposition density of the cesium, we're only acknowledging just gamma cesium-137 only, which is absolutely criminal, but you can do a mathematical extrapolation. Basically, you want to multiply by 600 to get the real number. So 600, so Daiichi City is 147,000 atomic decays per square meter in their community and the surrounding farmlands. And so when you look at, I got a whole list of this. We're not going to go through it. This is the only one I'm going to show you. But you can see the numbers in all these communities. 55, like you see 93, 55 would have been an evacuation zone in a nuclear power plant pre-Fukushima. Post-Fukushima, you can live there, shut up and die, get sick and die. So very, very vicious industry. Japan's traditional sake makers are growing it in a nuclear wasteland. And the nuclear industry is so secretive, they're not able to comprehend it. Local food's used by 93% of the school that provides lunch. So this is Taiwan trying to calm down the population by saying, we're not going to use the Fukushima food for the school lunches. We're going to use local food until you stop looking. And so they had a big press conference. And trusting this industry is a fatal mistake. The industry is not supposed to exist. Its entire legacy is predicated upon unbelievable deceit and deception and genocides and omnicides. England has grown politically irrelevant. Boris Johnson removed all restrictions just before he stepped down on the nuclear wasteland food farms and said he looks forward to seeing all the supermarkets and corner stores flooded with Fukushima products. That should horrify every human that's got humanity left into them. Institute demos how food is scanned for radiation. Well, you can't scan food. You can scan some radiation. You can't scan the food, quantify the radiation. It has to be isolated from external. EWG urges Biden to reject electric utility executives' call for more nuclear power subsidies. That's an extraordinary headline where somebody disparaged the nuclear industry. That's extraordinary. Finding common ground in nuclear energy and waste. There's not supposed to be a common ground. You got 8 decades and you never tried to come up with a single solution. And then when you finally said, here's the solution, is to dig a hole and put it in the ground, you can't even do that. Canada's going to take another 40 years before they can dig a hole in the ground. They got to get permission from the communities rather than put it somewhere where it's not going to be interfering. So in other words, they don't have to put it anywhere. Because your radioactive waste is still splitting the atoms into the environment. That's why they're not trying to contain it. They can't. And they won't. And they don't want to. Sadness is Somerset nuclear power stations near closure. No, there's an instant decrease in heart problems and liver problems and baby mortality events and lung diseases. Right? As soon as you close these disease factory down, people start getting healthier. Just as signs build to end nuclear power banned. That was West Virginia, I believe. Coal-dependent West Virginia eliminates ban on nuclear power. There you go, Dina. Bill Gates has never went to the Terra Power, never went to the coal mine. They won't close down for another couple of years. Oh no, we're going to start building it there. Well, they don't even close down till 2025. Another 3 years. You're not going to build jack shit because it's not even going to close down. Nuclear is 100% scam, right? To make you not come up with solutions, not look for or not implement renewables. Oh no, small modular reactors. Everybody's going to have one up their arse. Put a light bulb in their nose and read their books at night. Nuclear power advocates quote erroneous summary of UN climate report. International Energy Agency, an intergovernmental agency that shouldn't exist, by the way, says nuclear power is a technical necessity but a matter of choice. But it's not a technical necessity but a matter of choice. In other words, you don't need nuclear. But the nuclear industry was like, no, the UN climate panel, the IPCC, said, as a rule, the IPCC only presents the necessary scientific basis for advancing the international community. They don't have no authority. They're a corporation. They're United Nations. They're a subsidy. They don't have any sovereignty over your planet or your countries or your communities or your governments. They have 195 representatives at the UN that sold us all out. They sold us out for the embargoes against Russia and caused inflation. Why Russia just sold the commodities to somebody else and was never affected and everybody else was destroyed. They removed restrictions on the food with no referendums, no voting, and no public debate. Not even reports from the local medias. They should be executed publicly for what they've done. Legally or not. Nuclear scientists just got one step closer to saving us from climate catastrophes. Like, whenever I hear stories like that, you want to grab them by the back of the fucking head and drag them down to reactor 3 and throw them in there. And say, have a nice fucking day. Is the United States trying to fight and win nuclear wars? You can't win a nuclear war. EDF announces plans to acquire General Electric's turbine units in France. Yeah, because they're going bankrupt. And the industry can't live without them. So nationalize them, right? Team of scumbags to visit the wrecked. Like calling Fukushima wrecked? Calling a nuclear meltdown wrecked instead of a nuclear meltdown, I think is an unforgivable betrayal. Off with their heads. We got to bring back beheading with the guillotine, public executions, right? As an incentive for these people to try to be humans. Because right now, there's no incentive not to be monsters. And what do you end up with? Well, monsters. Now have jeopardized the future of the species. Not has, but permanently now, catastrophic event for the species. New nuclear fusion experiment produced 59 megajoules of energy. The extra energy they allegedly produced was enough to boil 60 kettles of water from 150 million degree Fahrenheit temperatures. So there's no way to quantify an assertion like that. Nuclear plant maintenance in Finland benefited from joint development. Nobody benefits from nuclear. We all get sick and die. All the birds, all the animals, all the insects. Completion of MBIR reactor brought forward. This is Russia's sodium-cooled fast neutron breeder reactor. It's a plutonium reactor. There's no good way for that to end, because once it takes the fuel out and puts it in the pool, it's still producing the plutonium. And there's no containment. It's constant release. The amount we're talking about is catastrophic each day, let alone years and years of it. The industry in Russia is completely out of control. They're now so evil. You know, if you look at one thing that's interesting about Russia, go watch videos of Russia's population sometime. Russia doesn't have GMO foods. And so it's very rare to see somebody obese in Russia. In Canada, it's a 9 out of 10. Because Canada was poisoned by Japanese food, right? After 93 days, Canada removed all restrictions. And everybody else kept them. So Japan couldn't ship the nuclear lethal food. People all across Canada are constantly dropping dead of heart attacks in their 40s, walking down the road, out in their gardens, just randomly dropping dead after eating bioaccumulating radiation from the food and from the fallout. Canada was... The amount of radiation that fell on Canada is stunning. UK regulators ruled Chinese nuclear reactor design safe, secure and clean. Yeah, because you want to build it in the UK, but that didn't work out. And it leaks like a sieve. The fuel pools have no containments. When they start putting fuel in these new plants, in the pools, it's hemorrhaging all day, every day into your environment on a number you can't even comprehend, let alone me. Nuclear energy shear and power generation to be increased. New Delhi. They've been doing that worldwide since Fukushima. A lot of reactors gone offline, but the shear stayed pretty high. You know how they done that? They filled up all their reactors maximum, turned them up maximum, in order to keep the shear up worldwide, to keep the scam alive for another decade. And these are old, decrepit reactors that are embrittled from neutron bombardments. These are high-pressure reactors, decades old, so the metal is very fragile. It's also known as the Wigner effect. Nuclear energy shear and power generation be increased, said scumbags. Iran weeks from having enough material for a nuclear bomb. We hear this story several times every month for the last decade, eh? The fear-mongering is real, folks. They're going to come and get you. Boris Johnson, Green Revolution falling apart. Is nuclear expensive and not viable? And they're still, they've only thrown less than $1 billion at Sizewell. They need around 36 billion euros or pounds, sterlings. They only threw in $1 billion at it and claimed that there's a nuclear renaissance. And it's going to be the biggest man-made anthropogenic, or the biggest man-made project in human history, to build a stupid nuclear site. And everything has to be triple inspected for a nuclear site. It's the most resource-intensive industry in human history. Every nuclear power plant needs 2 dedicated gas oil coal plants, large ones like you would normally use. So just use the 2 gas oil and coal, get rid of the nuclear. The idea of nuclear is to make weapons. New book explores theater of nuclear science. Yes, theater. Genocide. France plans 14 nuclear reactors by 2050. France got half their fleet shut down from corrosion, from the Wigner effect. They don't got enough water to keep the reactors running in the summer times. How are they going to build more? They don't have the manpower. They don't have the welders to fix the ones they do got. And they're trying to build reactors in other countries that are over a decade behind. It's absurd. It's just meant to please a large percentage of the government agencies that are dependent upon the nuclear industry. We don't see the actual supply chain behind it existing. It doesn't exist. There's no... Government Abbott fights back against the high-level nuclear waste coming to Texas. They'll do whatever they want to you. You won't stop them. Why do they hate Texas so much, I wonder? North Korea builds nuclear missile base near Chinese border. You really think China's worried about North Korea? EU has failed to create... It's on their property. They can build it anywhere they want. EU has failed to create gold standards for green finance, Spain says. 100%. They're calling nuclear green. It's such an incredible... I don't want to use a bad word. I'm just stalling. I'm trying to come up with a more appropriate word. Hang on. Russia taunts the West with huge military drills. Well, do you really think that the Americans in South Korea running drills against North Korea right alongside of Russia is not going to be interpreted that way too? Not only that, Russia and America work together. They demonize each other so the population acquiesces to the destructive military-industrial complex. destroying the budgets of the countries. American military-industrial complex just got almost $1 trillion. And every budget since 1960 is passed without any kind of pullback. So it gets bigger each year. And they use other things they want to piggyback in on the same budget because he knows it's going to pass. Evil. Nuclear is the evilest, though. There's nothing touches evil as bad as nuclear. It affects every creature, every bacteria, every fungus on the entire planet in the worst possible way. Carbon-free power project moves ahead on small nuclear reactors. They don't exist. You can't call them carbon-free. It's absurd to put that in a headline. That's brainwashing, right? Why would you put that in the headline, carbon-free? It's the equivalent of coming up and telling you to shut your fucking mouth and do whatever you're told. Department of Energy officials provide update on push to find a home for nuclear waste. 80 years later, we're still fighting over it. Because nuclear scientists are such wonderful problem solvers. Government agency planning a nuclear waste dump on United Kingdom's coast apologizes for calling them scumbags. They want to put the waste in the scumbags communities, and the scumbags got upset about it. Wow, I've never seen that coming, did I? NASA plans to crash the ISS into the spacecraft cemetery in 2031. NASA, the scum degenerate, gave us James Hansen. NASA should be banned for just doing that to us. You imagine all the precious resources, all the precious metals they got sent into space so they can spy on you. Imagine how stupid this industry actually is, how harmful and how wasteful the industry actually is, so they can be authoritarian, so they can play their fucking games. People are comparing the Beijing and Winter Olympics to the Simpsons Springfield. Well, Beijing Winter Olympics are to your left, Springfield is to the right. But that could be any nuclear power plant. It doesn't have to be Springfield. And Simpsons, of course, is used to indoctrinate the vulnerable in increments over decades into be complacent about nuclear waste and complacent about nuclear power plants. And obviously it was extremely effective. Troubled times for nuclear disarmament movement. You should be worried. First thing you got to worry about is if you get rid of nuclear power plants, there is no nuclear weapons. The Green Brief, an EU taxonomy fairy tale. Yeah, nuclear is green, folks. What a disgusting betrayal that turned out to be. Ukraine would have nothing to worry about if it had maintained its nuclear force. Really, you think Ukraine would have used nuclear weapons if they had it? If that was true, NATO would have gladly gave them all the nuclear weapons they wanted, which shouldn't exist. NATO shouldn't exist. They were created in conflict with the Soviet Union. Once the Soviet Union dissolved and destroyed everybody's pensions and patents of the countries, on top of that, NATO should have been dissolved too. Neutrino-less double beta decay experiments at Wright Lab. These are the most dangerous creatures on the planet, is the nuclear academic. They couldn't care less about any species or humanity or the future. They only care about their silly little study, which helps them pay their mortgages and their children to become scumbags just like them. Ontario's new Clean Energy Credit Initiative. In Ontario last year, Bruce Power spent, I can't remember the number of it, had something like $500 million in green bonds for nuclear. Because there's nobody in Canada that can hold them accountable. There is no Canadian government, there's the nuclear industry. There's no universities, there's the nuclear industry. They've taken over the whole country, and now they poison us all. This is only a test. Seabrook conducts a drill on Wednesday. Yeah, Seabrook, eh? Surrounded by beautiful estuaries. That's all contaminated. It's unbelievable from the nuclear fallout from that disease factory. And one thing we know about nuclear is they'll destroy everything. They won't hesitate either. And they do it the most cowardly way possible. The wind energy sector rejects the inclusion of non-renewable technologies in the EU green taxonomy. Too little and too late. It's too confusing for the investors. No, like calling nuclear green and renewable is absurd. It's absurd. It was meant to just promote nuclear. It wasn't meant to come up with renewable solutions, which should only be geothermal, I might add. And what are you going to do with this? You can't use it. Can't fire nuclear bombs off for freak's sakes. Nobody can cash their check on Friday ever again, including them. Virginia-class submarine Montana completes the first sea trial. So what? Why do you need that? You know, just don't put any nuclear weapons on it and get it there and float around. You're never going to use them. Why take the chance? In Chernobyl's ghost town, Ukraine forces trained for combat. They're stupid, and then there's the military, and the nuclear industry is infinitely worse than that. And I know that seems impossible, it's true. The wild card entry of China has accelerated the global arms race. The wild card entry. What? Like China just showed up? Anything to promote stupid. That's what they're really good at. Keep her going. We're getting there. Vast drill spotlight in Russia's grip on the standoff with the West. So, first off, Ukraine didn't have much for weapons. So as soon as Russia invaded Belarus and started to cross the border, NATO started delivering weapons to Ukraine. Ukraine would have lost a long time ago if it wasn't for NATO's constant I can't call them donations. This is NATO's gone to war against Russia, not Ukraine. NATO's just is not visible per se, right? But it's supplying the weapons. Otherwise, Ukraine has nothing, and the brains to use it. So NATO is gone to war. It's a covert war. France to invest 1.1 billion in mini nuclear reactors in the green drive. And when you look back, like we're doing right now in 2022 headlines, we're still in early February. We're still only at February the 9th. Is there a preemptive threat of a preemptive nuclear attack in Europe? That hasn't stopped now for 8 months, 9 months, that kind of rhetoric. All the scum media, too, is doing it every single day. The United States, according to Fauci, is on the verge of becoming a nuclear power. Really? I never noticed. End of restrictions as COVID approaches epidemic stages. The war in Ukraine, where there was at that time there was 59 other conflicts, wars going on worldwide. Why did Ukraine become the only important one? Because it was used to cause inflation worldwide, right? You really understand what's going on? Russia's unaware of Greece's plan to deploy nuclear weapons. Well, that's because they're NATO. Greece doesn't have nuclear weapons. NATO does. We're all radioactive, so let's stop being afraid of it. And whoever wrote Destroyed, all I really want to do is find them and tell them what I think of them. We're all radioactive, so they're saying you're all full of potassium, magnesium. So stop worrying about man-made radiation. What a disgusting maggot that person turned out to be. I got to put him in my pile of scumbags here. Hang on. There we go. Make sure he don't get lost. He was previous to Deputy... Look, they got Jerry Thomas on that story, folks. Geraldine Thomas. If anybody in the United Kingdom, the first person to be executed, because they don't have the death penalty there, should be Geraldine Thomas. What a horrific, disgusting scum she turned out to be. A barricade of armoured UN vehicles await the French Freedom Convoy. What France has done to the planet from nuclear is disgusting, from La Hague emissions. Premier Doug Ford pulling vaccine passports. He's still in power here in Canada. If you're a complete degenerate, they'll never get rid of you. If you're 100% scumbag, there's no way anybody can get rid of you. It's only people that are teetering on the fence can get one term. Everybody else is re-elected over and over and over. The France's Bikini Atoll, which basically, right, was quite a few of them. There was the French Polynesian Islands, Niger, where they get all the uranium from, 60-year civil war so they can have cheap uranium. The whole story is just a disaster when it comes to nuclear. They have meddled and managed to manipulate everything on the planet. You look at all the nuclear bombs. That was a nuclear war. These are nuclear wars we're talking about. So kilotons, that's 13,000 kilotons. Divide that by 20 to get Hiroshima bombs. Did I do it? Hang on. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. 13,600, right? So 13,600. Oops. 600 divided by 20 megatons or 20 kilotons is 680 Nagasaki bombs is what France set off. Around 600, almost 700 Nagasaki bombs. Because some bombs are bigger, see? I'm not sure if that's the total number that they had in mind. It could have been much worse. Can we block the sun to fight climate change? Do you know how rare it is to see the sun right now? They are blocking the sun. It's called chemtrails. They got really good at it over Vietnam for 9 years and wouldn't give it up after. People say, people who say that chemtrails don't exist, I really, don't try to have a conversation with somebody like that. You got 9 years of chemtrailing over Vietnam, 24 hours a day. There wasn't a tree leaf or a plant or a flower in the entire country left, or an insect. Yeah, no, don't exist, Dana. Yeah, they actually chemtrailed the skies over 142 ski resorts in the United States to make it snow, moron. You really think the technology don't get used? They've been using chemtrails for 70 years to lay fertilizer over farms and pesticides. The applications are actually everywhere. They used to make it rain over the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Vietnam. The monsoons last another 6 weeks and wash away villages and communities. that were supporting the resistance, the people that wouldn't let them kill them. Yeah. How many suicide bombers does it take to equal those fighter jets, I wonder? Wildfire worries dominate discussions of Rocky Flats refuge. Well, first off, there should be no refuges at Rocky Flats, for goodness sakes. And the wildfire is there because the place has so much radioactive fallout, it kills the bacteria and the fungus in the forest. And so the wildfires are much bigger than they normally would have been. Gamma irradiation market. Gamma irradiation markets. Stuff like that keeps me awake at night when I see stuff like that. Like, my God, what kind of evil are they actually up to? Campaign group opposing Hinkley Point C mud dump. The dump, because there used to be other reactors. So they're digging up the radioactive mud and bringing it out and dumping it in the sea. And the government says, no, we don't care. They got a permit to do it. It's safe. Options to dump wastewater is not an option. All fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment. So when they close a nuclear power plant down, finally get all the fuel out of the fuel pools, because the fuel pools are boiling off, they'll boil dry if you don't put in 120 tons a day, 120,000 liters a day back into the pool. They'll boil dry in a week or so, right? And then the fuel will catch fire and you have a nuclear meltdown. But when you take all the fuel out, you're still going to put in cast, you're still going to have the water left over. And the industry don't see why they can't just dump it, because it was going to evaporate it into the communities like they've been doing for 60 years anyway. Every day for 60 years. Do you want to do the math on it? I haven't got time right now. Roa's famous seaside resort is likened to Chernobyl. This was a community in the United Kingdom. This was a small community in the United Kingdom that was in disarray, and it was compared to Chernobyl. Chernobyl is a nuclear wasteland, so it was completely disproportionate. It didn't have any nuclear facilities close by, so you can't compare it to Chernobyl. It was just a community people didn't spend money on. Preliminary assembly of BNCT's unit for cancer treatment is planned in the spring. Like, you can't treat cancer with radiation. You know, your excrements have to go into a deep geological repository so they don't hurt somebody forever. You really think that that's going to solve? It's voodoo science. It's 2 to 3% of people that get the radiation survives longer with it than they would have without it. And 50% of them would have went into remissions if they didn't go that route. Oil surges $95 as Ukrainian tensions stroke supply concerns. No, they had embargoes, right? By United Nations, forced everybody, never forced me or you. We didn't have a referendum or a vote on whether we should have sanctions. A couple of people from your countries, from 195 countries, went to United Nations and says, I don't put embargoes. And now everybody has to suffer because these scum, degenerate monsters at the military-industrial complex, most people for some reason call United Nations, that's not supposed to exist. The worst thing that could happen to Earth was United Nations organizations could exist. Now they're taking over almost every facet of your life. They have a subsidy company for everything. World Health Organization, World Trade Organizations, UNICEF, IRPA, UNSCLEAR, the IPCC. They all tell you how to think, how to act, what you're going to do, what you're going to wear, what your country's policies are going to be. Instead of you having a country, they tell you what your country's going to do today and tomorrow and every other day. They've ruined your planet. and they're completely out of control. And if you don't rein them in, you have zero future. You probably got zero future now. You need to rein them in. And one of their subsidies, which I absolutely got so much evidence of a criminal organization, is IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. Should the International Atomic Energy Agency be disbanded, replaced, and charged with crimes against humanity and the species? That's so easy to quantify. You can win that in any court, even in a kangaroo court. They cannot defend themselves against the overwhelming evidence. Controlled burns scheduled for Oak Ridge Reservation. Controlled burns. So instead of cutting it up or mowing it and sacking it up and storing it in a nuclear dump, they're burning it. They do it at all these national laboratories, by the way. These are legacy sites, folks, left over from the Manhattan Project, where there was no rules, no regulations, because they're worried that they had you worried that somebody else was going to make you radioactive, and so they decided to release so much radiation the nuclear war couldn't even compete with it. Snowpiercer's newest survivor. This was a movie about nuclear war and radioactive fallout, and the planet goes into an ice age, but we've had nuclear wars. The planet didn't go into an ice age. In fact, quite the opposite. And the idea, that was a study produced by two people, see? And then that's been used now to assail reality for decades. Time to bring back Indian Point, the disease capital of New York City. The amount of fish that Indian Point killed each year is absurd. It's an old plant, it's decrepit, it had huge leaks. It had decades of reactor core stored in fuel pools hemorrhaging into the environment. That's still going on today, of course. And the building was closed down because it's old. It's not safe to run. You might get away with it for a while, but it's past pushing your luck time, see? High energy light, highest energy light ever detected from juniper, spotted by scientists, but they can't come up with a solution to fix a toaster. They can't come up with solutions for geothermal, but they can look 14 billion years back in time like a time machine, but they can't come up with a solution for nuclear waste. They can't stop the emissions from the fuel pools. They can't filter radiations in your tap water. DPP sacrifices Taiwan's people by lifting the ban on Japan's radioactive death food for political gain. And there is no gain by poisoning the population, except for pharmaceutical industries, of course. But what an absurd betrayal. What a hideous thing to do with the population. In 2018, they had a referendum. 2022, it was done back behind closed doors with the shake of a hand. No chance to say no. It took them a few years to get somebody in positions of authority, and then they pulled the pin on it and set it in motion. The United Kingdom done it, and America done it at the same time. There was zero resistance from Canada. We lifted all restrictions after 93 days. We surrendered within 3 months. So Japan couldn't ship food anywhere, only to Canada. Now everybody's sick. Taiwan's admittance a likely topic now for the Trans-Pacific national trade. So trading off, poisoning everybody in your country, every man, woman, and child, and animal and everything else in your country, so you can join a trade organization. I can't imagine why the people didn't run these people to the ground in a pack of 1 million people, chase them down and hang them from light poles. I don't understand it. That would have been the moral and ethical thing to do, wouldn't it? Taiwan's opposition goes on Fukushima food ban offensive. Yeah, long after they passed it. It's too late. You ain't going to change it. And to put Strontium-90 on the watch list. Imagine not having Strontium-90 on the watch list of radioactive foods from a nuclear meltdown site. And the significance of it is Strontium-90, there's 100 times more Strontium-90 for every Cesium-137. Strontium-90, by the way, doesn't even peak until after the first 1,000 days. And then it peaks for tens of thousands of days. And if you got Strontium-90, you got everything else. It's a disgusting, despicable, cowardly industry. It's a horrifically, hideously cowardly industry. The nuclear industry worldwide has the one thing in common. They're incredible cowards. They're incredible cowards. Tokyo games bashers. We want to have games in a nuclear wasteland. Eerily silent in the Beijing Genocide Olympic. No. China's really good at suppression. Can't compare one to the other either. I wasn't silent, so I came out and covered it. Wearing paper suits at a nuclear meltdown ain't going to help you. Boycott stupid. You know, every time I see any kind of dissent, because it's so rare, it shocks me. I'm like, wow, that's what a human looks like. My God. And so I'm blessed that I do these shows each night, and there's a few dozen of us that hang out here and keeps me sane. Scotland on Sundar readers' letters. Using nuclear power to meet our energy needs is stupid. Dangerous. AKA stupid. Like, nuclear power is banned in Ireland, his neighbour, right? But Scotland got lots of pro-nuclear. They'll kill everybody in their country so they can get a paycheck for a dozen years. Firm plans Japan's first nuclear fusion power plant. I love this picture of the latest, greatest monster idiot. It's hard to rationalize how they can look human, right? That guy's got a paper face mask or Photoshop, right? But almost no birds died in collisions with wind turbine blades, and they found out if you change the color, because you got to realize it's not like these things are spinning at 150 miles per hour, and it's absurd to suggest that the birds can't avoid it. Background is like a bird can fly through the trees, and weave and dance and chase insects all through the trees, but it can't avoid a great big windmill. What the hell is it? I'm hypnotized. I'm just a lowly bird. Give your head a shake. Macron announces the construction of 6 nuclear reactors. Guess how many they started? Oh, that's right, none. Guess how many they're close to starting? Oh, yeah, that's right, none. One thing, the nuclear industry can't go a day without massive propaganda through its medias. Not a single day. Not a single day. Where are we to here with the poll? Let's bring the poll up. Come on over here, buddy. Should the International Atomic Energy Agency, aka scumbags, be disbanded, replaced, convicted and charged, and convicted with crimes against humanity and the species? Yeah. What's your point? Of course they should be, Dana. The average person thinks that they're a good organization. The average person thinks that they're good people or something, because they grew up with the Hulk and Spider-Man and Simpsons shoved down their throat every second, every third video. No nukes, no more Chernobyls, bless your hearts. When it comes to nuclear power, we're playing with fire. And that's true, right? These are explosions. These are like little bullets going off every second inside your body, wrecking millions of cells every second. Your body's constantly trying to repair everything and attack the source. And as you bioaccumulate it into your body, and the different types of isotopes with different energies, because there's different isotopes besides cesium. I know that's hard to believe. It's hard to accept. But there's actually other isotopes. Capito supports nuclear energy opportunities for the state. They put a picture of some weird creature smiling. I can't wait to give your children diseases. UN team reviews Japan's plan to dump treated nuclear wastewater into the sea. First off, the tanks are empty. The tanks were built to manipulate you, to trick you, to purposely deceive you. Like, it's really simple. You don't have to be super smart. That's to stump a reactor 3. You're not getting near it. You're not pumping water out of it. At best, you're pumping water in it, but you're not going to get it back. These are lethal doses. The building lost its inventory. It atomized in aerosol, ionized and radiated. It was distributed right around the entire planet. Claiming that it's in the tanks is absurd. The reason you see the supports around the tanks, because you have a lot of earthquakes and the tanks are empty, and they don't want the tanks tipping over. Because they're empty, they'll shift, right? And so they built supports around the tanks to keep them in place because they have a lot of major earthquakes. If you fill up the tanks at 2.2 sieverts per liter, you're talking about 1.4 million sieverts per tank, which means you can't build another tank anywhere, let alone the first one. You can't step over the hose. You can't get close to the hoses that you're using. You can't change the filters to filter the water on top of that, because your filter you can't filter it because the scale and the numbers and the sizes we're talking about, we can't do it. There's no demonstration of it anywhere else on the planet. It's a hateful, disgusting industry. It's not supposed to exist, and it has to go. It's them or everybody in all the species. You can't have both. Algeria rights group to prosecute France for nuclear tests in the Sahara Desert. It's so radioactive every time. Each year the Sahara Desert has plumes covering half the planet. The radioactive plumes head back to France each year. And they won't even tell the Algerians where they buried the high-level nuclear waste to. They won't go and clean it up themselves. It's an industry that has to go. You have no choice. It's your responsibility, your obligation. This is our watch. This is not somebody else's. We are the defining moment. The future generation is not going to look back and say, why didn't you try? Because this little tiny band of rebels the world will never forget that we existed, and we will win. Why progressive opposition to disgusting nuclear energy and crop biotechnology are the biggest obstacles to addressing climate change. The biggest problem with climate change is radioactive fallout. Isn't that a fun picture? Radioactive plants coming out of plants. You can't grow plants from radioactive wastelands, sadly. People with good intentions, right? But unfortunately, rain with 20 million particles of radioactive iodine, 131 per liter, fell on the northern hemisphere. Simon Fraser University in British Columbia covered it up and said it was harmless. The whole story is absurd, as if only iodine-131 had fallen. When you have numbers like that, you're talking about a catastrophic event. Slams, I think this was United Kingdom. McElhenney slams the council's support for disease factors known as nuclear power plants. Bless their hearts. Nuclear Medicine Center. It's like trying to drink acid and say it's going to get rid of your headache. It's stupid. US B-52 nuclear bombers. They can't drop the bombs. And you have them flying all the time, by the way, right? The old bombers that they fly burns the same as 1 million in a 24-hour period. I can't remember the numbers we done it. Burns the same amount of fuel, gasoline, as 1 million cars would burn in 24 hours. How many suicide bombers does it take to equal an aircraft carrier, I wonder? 1 million, 10 million, 30 million, 40 million? MIAC to begin remediation of V-17 storage reservoir for liquid. Like, if you're not familiar with MIAC, MIAC is the stuff of nightmares. It was the former Soviet Union, now Russia's reprocessing and weapons production facility. They've had catastrophic events there, and particularly the Tetra River. Tetra River is a huge river network that goes all the way down to the Black Sea. I can't remember. There was hundreds or thousands of communities they had to abandon. Because the MIAC, all they done was poured all the high-level waste directly into the river. They didn't evacuate them either till months or years down the road, by the way. Still, people went back, don't know any better. Don't drink from the river. Okay. And they get a pension, though. It's $6 a month. Way to go, Russia. Well, you need the money for nuclear weapons, Dana. I know, I'm just saying. Giving the victims $6 a month. Just give it time. That's what TEPCO will offer the victims, I'm sure. U.S. nuke test no different than genocide of native tribes. The genocide of native tribes was just so humiliating what they done. And it was just done out of stupidity. Refused to get along. Refused to try. Refused to acknowledge anybody else had worth. Danger from American nuclear power plants. Fake spare parts were installed. We've covered a few stories over the last couple of years, particularly the Japanese manufacturers. They ship huge parts worldwide that weigh 300,000 pounds or 500,000 pounds that were defect and had to be shipped back, and they falsified it. And we're talking about these were shipped out to hundreds of nuclear reactors worldwide. All nuclear reactors still have some of these parts. It was going on for 25, 28 years where they faked the safety of the certifications. The Atomic City Girls is no small feat. So the Atomic City Girls, that story is an insane story where girls, like young children, were used to make the Radium Girls. You ever heard it? There's a movie about it now. It's actually a pretty good movie, which is unusual when it comes to radiation. But if you ever look up the Radium Girls, there was only a few years ago that came out. I'm going to watch it again tonight, actually, and download. I meant to have it in my collection. It's such a sad story, what they done to the girls. And they knew the radiation was poisoning the girls. And the girls would lick the little brushes, and they were putting dots on watches so the genocidal bomber pilots can drop their bombs on the women and children in poor men in other countries. And so they had these children, because they had the little fingers and everything, putting dots on, and the children's their jaws were dropping off, and they had their special doctors, and would say the children were promiscuous and had terrible diseases from sex and everything else, and that the radiation had no adverse effects on them, when they knew unequivocally it was going to happen to every one of them eventually. And the horror that they went through, even Madame Curie advocated for the victims, for goodness sakes. And the nuclear industry is like, no. We're the nuclear industry. We're allowed to do whatever we want. It's better to sacrifice everybody than lose a war. Right? The words of an idiot. Anybody says other words like that, there should be 1 million people chase them down, tear them apart. Removing Sheffield nuclear drama threads from Brit boxes is meaningless compared to the threat of war. So when the Ukraine crisis, which was staged, which was a false flag, it was meant to keep the pandemic, but in a different level, right? To keep the impoverish. This was an agenda by the World Economic Forum. It's hard to appreciate it, but over half the Canadian government alone, not counting every other government, half the Canadian government has went to the World Economic Forum. And you're not even allowed to mention it in Parliament, or they pretend that your microphones are not functional. Removing Sheffield nuclear drama threads was a movie from British, like British equivalent of movie centrals, because there was a Ukraine crisis. Didn't want the population to think about nuclear, because they were trying to promote nuclear weapons at the same time. So they actually hid an old drama about nuclear war so the population wouldn't get itself worked up, because they wanted to promote nuclear weapons. Delivery partner's name for cleanup of West Crumbia nuclear site, which is the Sellafield. There's 1,000 buildings there, for goodness sakes, radioactive wasteland. They're taking waste from all the old Magnox reactors and storing it there also. Imagine if that place starts melting down, folks. Nothing says stupid quite like nuclear. This is Crumbia's Sellafield site. What's that in the background? That can't be farms. Nobody would put farms around a nuclear reprocessing facility with a meltdown going on since 1957, would they? Nobody could be that evil. Well, you're right. The nuclear industry isn't nobody. It's just a genocide, omnicide machine. The reason it's surrounded by farms is so they can poison you at your supermarkets and you can never escape them. And it lowers the level consistently around the nuclear site, because you're shipping the radioactive food to unexpecting consumers. And so children are 100 times more vulnerable than adults for the same meal. You really think that's going to turn out good? Do you really think that's not going to poison tens of millions of people over its lifespan? Everybody. Well, you'd be wrong if you think that way. It's just, why so fucking evil? What's the point of that? Why are almost all nuclear power plants surrounded by farms? Because they're so evil, there's no checks and balances. That's what you ended up with. So when are you going to stand up? When are you going to say enough? Don't you give a fuck about your kids and your friends and your families and your loved ones and yourselves? You're really going to sit in silence and think you're fucking immune? Excuse the language. EDF, scum of the scum, said there was an unexpected power failure at a French nuclear reactor. Yeah, they were saying that all year. Reactor after reactor after reactor went offline. American B-52 bombers spotted flying over Cornwall amid Ukraine tensions. It's not like they're going to use them. So why are they there? They're there to cause the controversy, right? Working to prove cancer cure. Yeah, stop using man-made anthropogenic radiation on the victims, moron. Fukushima man returning home wants to tell the sons about his error. Returning home to a nuclear wasteland with lots of no-go zones where you can't even cross the street in some communities that you shouldn't be in then. If you can't cross the street, like there's communities where they open up a little section. You got to drive in and get in your property. You can't leave it unless you're going to leave the city. Can't cross the street. So if your kids are playing soccer ball and accidentally kicks the ball out to the other side of the street, even though you can see it, you're legally not allowed to walk across the street and pick it up because it's too radioactive. You really think radiation is not going to affect the zones where you got people living? Do you really think it just is not airborne? There's no reason not to kill the nuclear industry. There's every reason to kill the nuclear industry. It's you don't, it'll kill you, period, and every other species on the planet. Plymouth Raleigh radioactive water dump gains bipartisan support. Oh, how are we doing here? Oh, we're almost halfway through February. IAEA delegation supervised Fukushima water release. That's a like IAEA admitted that they have no influence over Japan and nuclear industry in Fukushima. They have no authority. They can't compel Japan to do anything. So when you see headlines like that, I don't understand why they're so incredibly evil. And there's no checks and balances. No such thing as a journalist. You got better chances of getting hit by a Soviet satellite in the next 3 seconds than you do of ever reading an honest journalist. There's no lack of evil in the nuclear industry. There's a huge lack of anybody that's honest. I've never seen anybody ever. Chinese and Taiwan trade pacts hold bids on the Trans-Pacific Partnership agenda this week. Like, they're going to ship the food in Taiwan, then Taiwan can ship it to every other country and poison people. That's how they're doing it, right? It's time to abolish the family. Why though? Which is the foundation, generations, as long as we can remember. Change that because scumbags don't feel comfortable exist because of their legacy of genocides. Scientists can't agree about Chernobyl's impact on wildlife. And they show you the large migratory animals. They don't show you the birds and the bees and the insects and everything else, the pollinators or anything like that, the ants and carpenters and spiders and all kinds of stuff like that. No, they'll show you caribou and moose and wolves and stuff like this, migratory animals, and claim that there's they closed 9,300 farms, for Christ's sakes, in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom. You really think it's safe around Chernobyl? I despise media for its lies. After covering it for so long, I can't contain my contempt anymore. And it's contempt. It's it's deadly what they're doing. The deceit and dishonesty is deadly. The only outcome is destroy everybody's future. Radiopharmaceutical and nuclear medicine. They're like, you're talking about putting man-made anthropogenic radiation in a human, and no two treatments are the same like terracotta soldiers. Nothing has ever cured anybody. 3%. which is, by the way, the misdiagnosis number, is 3%. So the ones they allegedly helped never had cancer in the first place. They had it after, though. Editorial: lift the blanket ban. Taiwan has nothing to fear about Fukushima import. This is absurd to suggest that. Right? You can't quantify that. You're talking about a nuclear wasteland where they're growing food and shipping it. You got a bunch of people in suits pretending that there's some attributes with a human, and then come out and make a statement claiming there's nothing to fear, but there's everything to lose. It's not like you got to eat a lot of it. You just got to eat a tiny fraction of it to end up getting sick in increments over time. And your children are infinitely more vulnerable, and females are 4 times more vulnerable than males. The less females, the less population in any species. And this attacks all species with equal enthusiasm. Plutonium problems won't go away. I actually had a commenter in the comment section earlier claiming, don't worry about plutonium, worry about radium. It's way worse, Dana. I probably thought I wasn't going to read the comments and catch it. Well, they were wrong. I blocked them right away and come out with a retraction for it. Provided documentation so people didn't get hoodwinked. Think about how evil you got to be to say something like that, because that wasn't an accident, see? Hi, everybody. Where are we to here? We're at half of it almost. What are we doing at? 2 hours, 20 minutes. Feels like I've been at this for 4 hours. It's like, because I'm at this all the time, right? So I'm barbarized by the lies. I'm damaged by the constant propaganda. I'm damaged in the frustration. Right? You know, I got a good willpower and I'm able to bounce back. It's like I run a marathon each day, and you shouldn't do that, right? To be exposed to so many lies for so long and having that affect you, unfortunately, as you know, the ones that are hanging around, it's impossible, right? But, you know, somebody has to come out and say, hey, you know, hello, this is madness. Nuclear transport, is atomic energy really a viable path to reach a net zero? Which was studied by Miles Allen. The net zero. Yeah, you're going to power 1 million homes with no emissions, right? Shut your friggin' mouth, moron. Orano, which is French. French are so disgusting, the nuclear industry in France, not French, sorry. The nuclear industry in France is despicable. A nuclear miracle in search of renewables. Trust nothing the nuclear industry tells you, period. Not one fucking word. Don't trust them. Right, that's the rule of thumb to be in understanding nuclears. Don't believe anything they tell you. Research everything. Don't take anything from United Nations. Don't take anything from UNSCLEAR or IRPA, the IPCC. These are all United Nations, by the way. They all sound like different organizations. They're played out that way. They'll even have public TV debates where they have the IRPA, the IPCC, UNSCLEAR, and the IAEA fighting with each other, but they're all the same organization. It's complete controlled opposition, right? None of them are going to bring up any pertinent, valid worries and concerns. On contrary. They got to get consent, so they have to go through that routine, right? They got to sit there and lie to you all day. Let's go for another little bit, if that's possible. Last Fukushima town to reopen. Well, there's like 18 towns that are reopened in the last couple of years, but that's not honest too. There's 18 towns that reopened, but only parts of them, like 10% or 6% or something like that. So instead of saying, partial reopening, in this town is the same thing, it's partial reopening. Like you can't cross the street to go to another house there. And Futaba is just a couple kilometers away from ongoing multiple nuclear meltdowns, each one 100 times the size of Chernobyl. And on top of that, there was 8 fuel pools with decades of reactor cores in each one were lost. And I mean lost, 100%. Caught fire, blew up, caught fire, blew up. And that community they're talking about, he can't even cross the street. You had people come in and paint murals and then take off back to Tokyo, and they call that a revitalization. It's a nuclear wasteland. The reactors are still melting down a couple of kilometers away. The nuclear industry don't give a fuck about anything, including themselves. Atoms for peace. Probably one of the most dishonest statements in human history. A journey against delayed. Listen, atoms, there is no such thing as man-made anthropogenic peaceful atoms. And think about how small an atom actually is. And the fact that a single one can harm you, any child or any human or any plant or any animal, forever. DeepMind is trained, which is Google, I believe, Google, to control nuclear fusion, which is just, that's a fable. You don't have fusion. The propaganda is strong, isn't it? The misrepresentation is strong. The deceit and dishonesty is very, very strong. I mean, for me to look at my videos with only 20 people on it is absurd. That's an absurd small number. It's a ridiculous small number. Bless your hearts, every one of you, by the way. We got 2.5 times more votes than we got viewers. There's no censorship going on there whatsoever, do you? China now understands what a nuclear rivalry looks like. Again, if we should create this genre that investigates things. Probably call them journalists, maybe, or something like that, if it hasn't been taken up by the propaganda machine already. So we need people that does forensic investigative research and tells the truth, right? I don't know if it'll ever happen. Civilization has only been around for a fraction of a moment, right? But at some point in the future, when we have a civilization, when we have a humanity, we're going to create an organization. We're going to call it something like journalism. Current generation of journalists are not journalists. They're the industry, and their job is to fuck you out of a future. The head of the IAEA, the head of a genocide, omnicide machine, that we got a poll going tonight that should be arrested, charged with crimes against humanity and the species. This is a criminal empire. And a cowardly one at that. Absurd coward industry, right? United States Department of Energy launches a nuclear hydrogen infrastructure program. United States Department of Energy. Making hydrogen from nuclear to try to save nuclear, because that's all they're doing, it's not an honest attempt. What I wish nuclear energy opponents understood will happen if they win. Like, go down to Fukushima nuclear wasteland, take a walk around before you say stupid shit like that. You really think all these farms surrounding the nuclear power plants, this is a French nuclear power plant, but when you look up pictures of it, it's surrounded by farms. That's not what they show you in the picture, though, is it? You know why? Because they're insidiously aware of how evil they are. Nuclear power is not on the rise. Last year it was 291.5 gigawatts of energy. 291 of it was renewables. 0.4 of it was nuclear. So to suggest that nuclear power is on the rise, where's the fact checkers? Well, their job is to make you confused, not contradict the lies. And the whole problem with this is February we're covering, right? And it's, there's all these stories, and you literally got to challenge every story. That's simply yellow journalism, the fact that we're forced to challenge that much yellow journalism. Yellow journalism is where the journalists are dishonest and deceitful and deceptive. And that's what we see constantly. How green is nuclear energy? Interesting engineering, which, by the way, would cut your throat in a heartbeat. Each story, that's what they do for a living. Ukraine sets out a nuclear priorities. During a nuclear war, they kept their reactors running, praying for a meltdown. Department of Energy offers $6 billion to keep struggling nuclear reactors online. Well, first off, $6 billion is just change for a single nuclear power plant, let alone 100. And then the nuclear industry tried to use that as a renaissance, saying, look, see, nuclear's coming back strong, baby. No. $6 billion is irrelevant. The Darlington was $13 billion just to do renovations. And they got that money immediately allocated immediately after Fukushima, and so did the other site, Canada. Because they knew that if the population woke up, they wouldn't get a nickel. And so they located themselves $26 billion and everything else in between, right? It always frightens the shit out of me. This is the Kent nuclear site. They want to use a mini nukes there. It sure looks like farms to me in the background. Cybersecurity. Well, don't put your nuclear plants online, stupid. Morons. Morons putting your nuclear plants online. Morons. Any missile launch may be perceived as a nuclear strike among tensions. It's just a little war that NATO is heavily involved in. That shouldn't exist. NATO defense minister discusses Russia. Why? Ukraine's not part of NATO. Mind your own business, scum. And they didn't mind providing Russia or Ukraine with serious weapons. That's not a betrayal at all. Oh my goodness. I think I better give it up, I suppose. Let me see what we get doing here. It's 2 hours and 35 minutes. That's enough of a beating today for me. It was pretty good. I thought we done pretty good. It's a lot of stories, isn't it, when we cover it this way? Holy shit. Vroom, 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 vroom. And almost every single story deserves at least one kind of comment. Just to make sure that, because you can't read all the stories, because that's normally what we do. We try to cover the lies in every story. And some days, there's so many lies and so many stories, you can't actually cover it. At the typical day, it takes you 2 hours just to cover the basic lies in every story about nuclear in a 24-hour cycle. It's mind-numbing how difficult it is to gather it all up. It's so frustrating, and so what we're doing for the last 2 shows and this show is recapping the 2022 crazy whack job. And all we're doing is just going through the headlines, and that's so frustrating. If you're not familiar with this, right, it's so frustrating because you can't go in depth like we normally do for each story. We cover each paragraph. We flush out each lie if there's a lie in every paragraph, and there is in every story, every day, worldwide, symmetrically, and you're not worried about it, that doesn't concern you. I mean, this is why we have a poll. It's because the industry is so prolific. It's incapable of telling the truth. No concept what the truth is. What it knows, it just refuses a single time to acknowledge it. Not even once. Should the International Atomic Energy Agency, aka United Nations, be disbanded and replaced individually by countries and charged with crimes against humanity, past, present, and forward, and the species? And that's a resounding yes. Thank you so much. You folks are awesome. You bring the awesome back into awesomeness. And the poll says it all. So does the music. There's enough beating for everybody today. I feel good about it that we got 2.5 hours in before I finally cracked up. Because that's basically why I stop, is I'm starting to crack up, right? If I don't stop now, I'll start yelling. I know it might seem like I'm yelling all along, but I'm actually not. I'm in second gear trying not to yell for the first 2.5 hours. Once I reach a certain tipping point, I'm like, if I don't stop the show now, it's not going to be good at all. I got 49 votes on the poll. Do I hear 50, 50? Do I hear 50, 50, 50? Do I hear 50, 50? Do I hear 50 votes, 50 votes, 50 votes? Come on, give us 50. I'm not going till I get 50 thumbs up on the vote. Or 50 votes, rather. We got 41 thumbs up. If you made it this far, remember to give us a thumbs up if possible. It might not register it. It might not. I don't know. We got 49 votes. I'm waiting to get 50. Good night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Hope everybody had a great day today. Hope you all had a great night tonight. Great night tomorrow night. I gotta move all of this over so I can find my spot tomorrow. Just bear with me. If I don't move it, I'll forget and I won't find my spot tomorrow. Because we're way down the rabbit hole. We're so far down the rabbit hole. I'm looking for the demons, aka United Nations. Should the International Atomic Energy Agency be charged with crimes against humanity? We got 50! Okay, we're going to end the poll. Thank you, everybody. We got 50. I got a bucket out there full of ice. I'm going to go stick my head in like an ostrich for a while. Try to cool down the old noggin. Get back at it. So we can do it again tomorrow. My voice is giving out on me, eh? Now, normally I stop on Thursday, right? If I stop on Thursday, it's going to take me a lot longer to get through all of this. So I don't know what to do. Do I take a couple of days off, or do I just grind through it until we get it all done? At the rate we're going, we're looking at over 20 days to do a recap for 2022. Oh my God. Just the thought of it makes me sick to my guts. But it's actually kind of fun because all this stuff had gone down the black hole. People already long forgot about all these headlines. But when you're doing it, you're doing a 2-week headlines in 3 hours or less, you're seeing these patterns, eh? It's really fascinating. It's very important, obviously. So I'm just going to keep pushing ahead. Can't get any worse. All I can do is get a bit better. Can't get worse. Let me close the poll here. 51 votes. Gotta like it. Thank you, everybody. We're going to end the poll. 51 votes. That's a fantastic poll. Thank you. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. And so this is early shows because I'm pretty burnt out. And that's all I can pull off right now. And then I get a break for 5 or 6 hours before bedtime for a change. And I'm hoping that'll rejuvenate me. So far it's working. And check to see if you're subscribed, because YouTube always unsubscribes people. As soon as you stop paying attention, they're going to unsubscribe you. I know Richard said he's not getting notifications, but he's not subscribed any longer. They unsubscribed him to me, right? So if you're not getting notifications, check to see if you're unsubscribed, because the industry... I've seen people get unsubscribed every single day and blame me. It's absurd, right? God bless everybody. You have a great day, great night. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Basically, I think this will be at the same time until we get it done. In the afternoons, my time is 4 p.m. Right now, that's the schedule we're on, trying to make it work. You have a great night, folks. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Have a great day wherever you do, great night wherever you do. Great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody soon enough because we got a lot of this to cover. Take care. Yeah, good night, everybody. Take care.